Returned over and over again, the alien orphan finally found a home with a human. The skies above Draxel 4 were a dull violet, thick with frost clouds and the low humming traffic of adoption barges that came and went without fanfare. The orphanage compound, tucked behind an old iron crater wall, looked more like a holding facility than a place for growing hearts. And inside, in the far corner of Sector D, behind a translucent force curtain that buzzed faintly every 5 seconds, sat Karen, silent, stone-faced, and alone. She had watched them all go. The other children, adopted by glossy-looking families with matching eyes and promises sweet as synth fruit. One by one they were chosen, even the infants that leaked goo from their snouts or the troublemakers who bit staff members out of spite. But Karen remained. Cycle after cycle, season after season always returned. Her last family had lasted exactly 30 hours. They'd been Yushtari nobles from the glacial moons, wealthy, sterile, seeking a unique addition to the family holograms. Karen, with her muted lilac skin, translucent cheek crests, and rigid silence, had seemed exotic enough until she refused to play their flute rituals, until she stared too long and asked too little, until she cut her own food without asking permission. Then they brought her back, not even stepping out of the shuttle as a staff droid unloaded her satchel with clinical detachment. The head caretaker, Miss Trelza, didn't yell, she never did. She just updated the registry in her datapad with a flick of one clawed digit. Inside returned again. Entry 9th attempt. Karen didn't react. She stood still, holding the same cracked satchel she'd left with, her expression unreadable. The other children whispered behind their hands, casting her glances like she was a ghost. One boy joked she had rot in her aura. A little girl said, "She'll never be chosen, she's cursed." Karen didn't argue. She simply returned to her corner, curling her thin limbs beneath herself and faced the wall. When night came, the lights dimmed to a soft blue hum and the lullaby tones of the orphanage began to play overhead, a melody designed to simulate comfort. But Karen knew better. Comfort didn't exist here, not for her. She stared at the ceiling and whispered to no one in particular, "Don't hope, just disappear." 3 days after Karen's latest return, a visitor came to the orphanage, an unusual visitor. He arrived in a civilian cruiser with Tehran markings half erased by scorch marks and battle dents. The landing was rough, not careless, but honest, like the ship didn't pretend to be more than it was. The man who stepped out wore a heavy, synth leather coat patched at the shoulders, and his boots looked like they'd crossed more dust than most freighters. His beard was ragged, his left wrist bore a mechanical brace, and his eyes were soft but quiet, like they'd watched far too many people die and still hadn't stopped loving them. "Name?" Trelza asked at the front console, not looking up. "Colin Voss," the man answered. "Former planetary engineer, retired field medic, Tehran descent." "I'm not here to tour." That made her glance up. "Most aren't. They want a photogenic infant or a youngling that speaks 7 dialects. What do you want?" Colin didn't hesitate. "The one who's been here the longest." Trelza blinked. "No preferences? No filters? I want the child who's been overlooked the most." The room stilled for a moment. No one ever asked that. After a brief pause, she called up the records, filtered by length of stay, and one name pulsed at the top. "Karen," she said. "She's been returned 9 times. Doesn't talk much. Won't cry. Barely eats. The others think she's cursed." Colin Voss nodded once. "Perfect." He followed her down the quiet corridors, past rooms filled with curious children, peeking around doorframes. Some called out, others posed, hoping to catch his attention, but he didn't waver. His stride was steady, eyes locked ahead. When they reached the back room, Trelza keyed open the force screen. Karen was sitting on the floor, sculpting dust into small spiral patterns with one claw tip. She didn't even look up. "This is her," Trelza said dryly. "She won't," but Colin had already sat down cross-legged on the floor, mirroring the child's posture exactly. From his coat he pulled out a small, ancient thing, a Tehran music box with a solar cracked dial and a few missing teeth on the tune wheel. It had survived 5 wars and a house fire, and still, when he turned the key, it sang a haunting, lilting melody. Karen's fingers froze. Her head tilted, her eyes glassy and wary, fixed on him for the first time. Colin didn't speak. He just let the music play. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then she whispered, so quietly Trelza almost didn't hear it. "Why?" Colin answered without blinking. "Because you haven't been chosen, and that makes you mine." The music box clicked shut. the tune ending on a soft note of longing. And for the first time in 1,000 sleeps, Karen didn't turn away. Karen had learned long ago that adults always broke their own promises. They came with sweet words, bright clothing, careful hands, and imitation kindness, but they always left. Sometimes they left angry, sometimes in tears, but always with the same phrase hanging in the air like fog: "She's just not what we expected." So when Colin Voss returned the next day with a signature tablet and a solemn face, she stared through him like she had the others, waiting for the hidden disappointment behind his kindness to show. But it didn't. Instead, he asked no questions. Instead, he simply knelt again beside her and offered her a wrapped cloth pouch, warm with steam and smelling of Tehran bread. She didn't touch it at first, but when her stomach growled against her will, Colin said nothing, only unwrapped the pouch for her, placed the roll gently in her lap, and then moved 2 feet away to give her space. Karen had never tasted earth wheat before. It was strange, soft, filled with pockets of steam and sweetness. She stared at it like it was a trap, then slowly, she took one bite. And when nothing bad happened, when he didn't take it away or correct how she held it, she took another, and another. Colin didn't smile in victory. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a small toolkit and began fixing one of the broken tiles in the floor beside her. As she ate, she watched him in silence, curious, cautious, studying his every movement. Most adults hated silence. They filled it with noise, plans, lectures, or pity. But Colin Voss lived in silence like a tree, lives in soil. That night he came again. This time he brought an old hollow slate with schematics of old spaceports. "This one," he said, tapping the blueprint, "was where I used to sleep in a locker room with 46 other soldiers. I liked being last to fall asleep. It meant I could listen to them breathing, and I'd know they were still alive." Karen, for the first time, met his gaze for more than a second. He said, "I know what it's like to stay quiet because you think your voice won't matter." Still, she said nothing, but something small and sharp inside her shifted. A frozen part of her rib cage cracked. The next morning, she was waiting for him before he arrived. The day the adoption was finalized, it rained purple acid mist on Draxel 4. The transport lot was slick and steaming, the orphanage doors buzzing with power surges as storm winds howled. Outside, the other children watched from behind reinforced glass, some wide-eyed, others whispering predictions that she'd be back by nightfall. The caretakers, too, seemed skeptical, watching Colin Voss as if he were a naive fool playing rescue for his own guilt. But Colin didn't flinch under their stares. He held a coat in one arm, a weatherproof pack in the other, and when he reached Karen's door, he didn't knock, he simply waited. She stepped out without being called. No bags, no toys, she carried nothing but a strip of gray cloth, her blanket, since infancy, wound tightly in her claws. Colin crouched to her height. "Do you want to say goodbye?" Karen turned her eyes briefly toward the corridor behind her, toward the room where her cot had been stripped and reassigned 3 times already. No one had come to see her off, not even the droids. She looked up at him and shook her head once. "Good," he said, and then gently he helped her into the coat that was a little too big and zipped it all the way up. When her eyes fluttered at the unfamiliar warmth, he said nothing, just handed her the weatherproof pack and offered his hand. Karen stared at it for a long time. No one had ever offered their hand to her. She didn't know if it was supposed to be shaken or held or ignored. So she did something odd. She touched his wrist instead, exactly where the mechanical brace clicked into his flesh. She ran one claw along the metal seam. "Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. Colin's breath caught. "Not when I remember why I have it." And just like that, the storm couldn't touch them. They walked through acid mist and lightning bled clouds like they were walking through an ordinary breeze. He held her pack, she held his sleeve, and as the orphanage faded behind them into gray static and dust, Karen dared for the first time in her life to look forward. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but she let go of the cloth strip in her hand and never looked back. The journey to his world took 12 hours through 3 jump gates and 1 short delay at an orbital checkpoint, where the guard raised an eyebrow at Karen's adoption file. Colin gave him a look so tired and sharp that the officer simply nodded and waved them through. They landed on Terra, a human-colonized moon wrapped in soft blue winds and low sunlight. The transport bay was quiet, the air heavy with pollen, and Karen stayed close to his leg the entire walk toward the shuttle taxi. Her eyes devoured everything: tall silverleaf trees swaying like dancers, birds with transparent wings weaving between power lines, and most of all, the people who didn't stare. On Draxel 4, everyone had watched her like a broken sculpture on display. Here they moved past her without double takes or judgment, too busy laughing or arguing or carrying boxes to care that her cheek crests glowed dimly in the light. Colin's house wasn't large. It sat in the shadow of a rust-red hill with walls made of stone and weatherboard and solar panels that clicked softly when they turned. But it had windows, dozens of them, some cracked, others dusty, but all wide open. Light poured in like honey. It was the first time in her life Karen had seen a place not locked with security seals or blinking surveillance or magnetic doors. Inside, the walls were covered in old tech diagrams, faded hollow images of smiling squads, and pieces of ships that no longer flew. A long table sat beneath a crooked chandelier of Terran design, and next to it, a small chair waited already set with a plate, as if someone had expected her. She said nothing as he showed her around, pointing out the places to sit, where the food was stored, which blankets were warmest. Her steps were slow, cautious, as if expecting each floorboard to collapse or lash out. When he finally said, "You can sleep wherever feels safest," she chose the corner beneath the stairwell not because it was comfortable, but because no one could approach her from behind. She curled up with her back to the wall, coat still on, hands gripping the edge of her pack. But Colin didn't correct her. He only dimmed the light near the stairs, left a folded blanket at her feet, and whispered, "I'll be in the room upstairs if you need anything." Knocked twice. That night Karen didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because for the first time, no one told her she had to. And outside the house, the wind carried a soft melody across the hilltops, the same one she'd first heard from the music box. 3 days passed before Karen dared to venture past the kitchen. She was careful with every object, touching only what was needed, placing things back exactly as they were. Colin, true to form, didn't interfere. He worked in the shed each morning and returned in the evenings, sometimes covered in grease, sometimes with crates of salvage tech that he stacked like puzzles in the main hall. One afternoon she followed him outside. He was crouched over a cracked drone frame, trying to repair its alignment shaft. She said nothing as she watched for nearly an hour, studying every movement of his hands, how he used his left with mechanical precision, his right with deliberate patience. Then, as he groaned at a stripped bolt, she stepped forward, crouched beside him, and picked up the wrench without asking. Colin blinked. Karen adjusted the drone's joint and turned the wrench exactly 22 clockwise, enough to release the lock without further damage. The piece fell into his hand. "You've done this before?" he asked. She shook her head. "I just watched, and I remembered." That day he showed her more, not with words, but with tools. How to prime a stabilizer, how to reroute charge coils, how to solder without burning through the plate. She didn't smile, but her eyes moved faster, her hands trembled less, and when the drone finally lit up and hovered 2 inches off the grass, she gasped and immediately tried to hide it. "You can be amazed," he said gently. "It's allowed here." Later that evening, Karen sat on the porch steps with grease on her fingers, staring at the stars while the wind played with her hair. Colin came out, placed 2 mugs down, one warm with spice milk and the other bitter with black root coffee. She didn't drink hers at first, but then she whispered, "What happened to your sister?" Colin took a long breath. "She was born during the siege of Orion's Reach. We hid in a freight tunnel for 2 months. She didn't make it." Karen didn't apologize. She didn't ask for more. She just looked down at her hands. "They said I'd never be good with mine," she murmured. "That I'd only ever break things." Colin tilted his head. "Whoever said that never saw you fix what mattered." She turned to him with wide, uncertain eyes. "What if I still break things?" He smiled. "Then we fix them together." The wind stilled, the moon rose, and in the quiet between 2 breathing hearts, something irreversible began to grow. The days on Terra turned golden, dustless, and warm. Karen began to wake with the light instead of the alarms she had known all her life. She would pad barefoot through the wooden floorboards, her steps lighter now, more certain, checking on the tiny herb planter Colin had built for her from scrap sheet metal. She named the plants in her head, never aloud, but each one bore the secret of a memory. One for the music box tune, one for the night she dared to ask about his sister, and one she called safe. Colin never rushed her. He taught her how to cook with careful instruction and never stepped in unless she asked. When she finally tried speaking during a meal, mispronouncing a Terran word, he simply repeated it without correction and smiled like it was the first word he'd ever heard spoken. Slowly, her voice returned clumsy, soft, but present. Then the storm came. It arrived not in the sky, but on foot. Two alien officials from the Draxel Authority appeared at their door with cold badges and colder smiles, demanding to review the adoption legitimacy. They claimed she might have been misclassified in error, they said. They used words like retractable custody, administrative recall, and species stability. Karine stood behind the stairwell wall, heart pounding, as Colin opened the door wide and listened without a twitch. "She's not a crate of hardware," he said, voice like iron buried beneath velvet. "You're not taking her," the taller official, a Granic with polished scales, sneered. "The contract didn't include your emotional attachment." Karine watched as Colin, calm and without shouting, produced the authorization scroll, the biological compatibility tests, the psych report, and the court-stamped clause that gave him full legal guardianship under both Tehran and Draxilian accords. "You're trespassing," he added. "Next step is a planetary complaint to the Human Altari Custody Alliance." The Granic tried to stare him down, but Colin didn't blink. He simply said, "If you don't leave in 60 seconds, I'll release footage of you trying to intimidate a child through a home window. There's already a drone recording." He smiled. The men left. Karine's legs gave out the moment the door closed. She collapsed into a heap at the base of the stairs and curled her arms around her knees, waiting for the sky to fall, for the scream to come, for the sentence she had heard too many times before. But all she heard was the gentle step of boots across the floor and Colin sitting beside her. He didn't ask her to stand. He didn't touch her without permission. He just sat there, humming that melody again, one hand placed calmly near hers. Not holding, not demanding, just waiting. And for the first time, she reached out and took it. Karine wasn't ready for people, not yet, not in crowds. But when Colin mentioned the town repair fair, a simple gathering of local engineers trading ideas and scraps, she tilted her head like a curious fox. "Will there be ships?" she asked. "Only broken ones." He grinned. She went with him. At first she kept her hood up, hands tight in her sleeves, eyes darting. But the longer she watched the humans, the more something strange occurred. No one stared, no one whispered. A few even waved. A girl with blue-painted nails offered her a candied fruit stem. She didn't take it, not until Colin whispered, "She picked that one just for you." Karine tasted it and blinked twice. It was so sweet it hurt her teeth. Then, a boy near a junk table failed to rewire a small Recon-bot slim coil, muttering curses as the bot hissed and smoked. Karine walked up silently, crouched beside him, turned the rotor dial a quarter clockwise, then tapped the energy conduit once. The bot stopped shaking. The boy gawked. "How'd you?" "I watched," she said. More heads turned, but instead of ridicule, someone clapped. Then another asked, "Can you fix this too?" Before she knew it, Karine was on a mat surrounded by half-broken toys, drones, and panels. Grease stained her fingers and wires braided through her palms like vines. She looked up once, unsure, to see if Colin had wandered. He hadn't. He stood nearby with a cup of caf and a look on his face she couldn't read. It wasn't pride, it was something warmer, deeper, something like And when one of the little bots she fixed danced in a perfect circle and made a hiccup sound as it spun into a girl's arms, Karine giggled, a real giggle, not forced, not cautious. It exploded out of her like starlight. Everything stopped for a second. Then a boy laughed too, then a man, and then a ripple of joy passed over the square like a signal flare. Colin didn't say a word, but later, when the sun fell low and the wind whispered against their porch again, he handed her the half-repaired music box. "Want to fix the last gear together?" She nodded. They did, and that night the melody played from their windows stronger than it ever had. It was a month after the town fair when Karine first saw her reflection and didn't flinch. She had been adjusting a solar coil on the rooftop when the breeze shifted and blew her hood down. For a moment she froze, hands still gripping the copper bracket, heart racing as though she'd been caught doing something forbidden. But no one was watching, only the breeze, the clouds, and the warped reflection of herself in the chrome panel beside her. Her cheek crest caught the light, casting soft lavender arcs across her jaw, and her eyes, once dim, withdrawn, glowed faintly gold. She leaned closer. She didn't recognize the girl, not the quiet ghost child who once lived under stairwells or whispered to broken cottrels. This girl had scars, yes, But they weren't raw anymore. She was real now. She had grease under her nails and new calluses from holding tools instead of fear. That evening, over soup and root bread, Colin asked if she'd ever wanted to change her name. She paused mid-chew. I never thought I could. You always could. She looked down into her bowl. Then after a long silence, she whispered, Kes. Colin nodded slowly. Kes. It means ash light, she added, in my people's tongue. What stays after the fire? He didn't cry not then, but his voice cracked when he said, then let the galaxy know Kes Voss is the strongest light I've ever known. And from that moment on, she signed every device, every repair, every doodle with that name, not because she was erasing the past, but because she was finally strong enough to carry it forward with her own meaning. The Federation inspectors came without warning, gray-suited, tight-lipped, holding data pads and mandated inspection protocols. It was a routine check, they claimed, but the tension in the air said otherwise. Kes sat quietly in her corner of the living room, watching them skin the house, the workbench, her adoption file, her name, her history. They asked her questions. With flat voices and distant eyes. Was she integrating well? Was she aware of her conditional status? Did she understand that the adoption could be reviewed at any time? She didn't speak, not until one of them made the mistake of saying, we can always take her back. That's when Colin stood up very slowly and placed his hands on the table. She's not a tool you loan out. She's not a file entry. And if anyone tries to take her, they'd better be ready to fight me to the last molecule. The inspectors raised their eyebrows, logged their notes, and left soon after. That night, Kes went to the porch alone, stood under the stars with her bare feet on the wooden boards, and tried to understand the word forever. She whispered it to herself once, then again, like a song she was trying to memorize. Colin stepped out after a while and sat beside her. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Then he pulled a small square of cloth from his pocket. It was a Tehran citizenship patch. He handed it to her. You earned this. You're not borrowed anymore. You're mine and I'm yours. No more returns. No more doors closing. She looked at it, then at him, then very gently, she stood up, brushed dust from her knees and placed her hand on his shoulder. Forever, she said, and for the first time in either of their lives, the word truly meant what it was supposed to mean, a beginning, not a bargain, a bond, not a burden. And from that hill, under a dome of stars and rustling wind, a forgotten orphan and a battle-worn man became something the galaxy had long forgotten how to make a family.